Well, hello there and welcome. For this one, I just jumped right into the screen capturing after I already did the sketch on tracing paper, separated it out so I could have a layer of just the sketch lines, and did a really quick color comp to test what kind of colors I wanted to use here. I don't know about you guys, but I just wanted to cut to the good stuff and keep the video a little shorter. Speaking of which, I'll be re-uploading the previous videos so they're shorter and have better commentary. I put those up to share with my friends and a few family members, but as I try to grow this channel and share my videos with more people, I want to be more confident with what I put out. That being said, if you like seeing longer videos, do let me know. I'll make them longer. I just want to make you happy. So I wanted to do a greeting card, and Easter is right around the corner, so it made sense to do an Easter card. I played around with a few different approaches before landing here. I wanted it to be really cute and playful, but more substantial than just a generic bunny face and a line of text saying, "Happy Easter." I liked the idea of using bunnies and just making it crushingly adorable, but I wanted them to be doing something. When I was little, we would dye eggs every Easter, just like a normal family. I remember liking it, but I also feel like that's probably something little kid me was excited about for about 5 minutes and then got bored with. Either way, we still did it, and it's still definitely a very common tradition. I came across one of those life hacks posts about Easter DIY stuff, and one of the tips was to use a whisk instead of a spoon to hold the eggs while you're dyeing them. I liked that it provided a nice substantially sized prop for the rabbit to hold, and you could readily tell what it was. It had a distinct silhouette instead of using a spoon in the illustration, which wouldn't read as quickly, I don't think. It would also be pretty flat, and the whisk just took up space really nicely since it could be held upright. Easter is usually illustrated with nice, bright pastel colors, which can be fun to work with sometimes, but I just kept it pretty similar to the colors I usually use, and ultimately settled on a pretty warm tint in the end, which is rather unusual for Easter, but it does fit with my usual style. I've been redoing my website so I can send it out, and I was looking through some of my old work. Not like high school old, just a couple years ago, and even though the differences are pretty subtle in some cases, there are some differences where I feel like I stopped doing some things I used to really like, and I wanted to get back into incorporating those small things in there. Things like subtle and colored line work, slightly decorated backgrounds, and actual framework are some elements I got away from. Those work in some pieces, like this one I feel benefited from me taking a look at my old work, but other pieces might not need it. I also realized that I had even changed which Photoshop brushes I used, and that had an effect on the way that I draw. At some point during my time at school, one of my teachers had everyone get Kyle Webster's Photoshop brushes. For those of you who don't know what those are, Kyle Webster is a super awesome artist, but he's really made a name for himself by making Photoshop brushes that function really well and mimic traditional media. I'll put a link for them down in the description if there are any illustrators out there who want to try them out. I mostly use his brushes that mimic gouache painting because they have a pretty solid texture to them. They apply similar to acrylic paint or colored pencils, instead of a more transparent and finicky medium like watercolor. Before that class, I had never heard of Kyle's brushes, and I had been using a few random brushes that I had found from a background concept art painter. Once I got Kyle's brushes, I kind of abandoned those old brushes up until this project. It was really interesting to come back to them and realize that the reason I had chosen to work with them was the same reason I love Kyle's brushes. They're very similar, but Kyle's brushes work just a slight bit better in some aspects. I think though that I'll be using them both my old ones and Kyle's brushes now that I've gotten to know them both. I'll clarify, even though it's not at all necessary, I'm not sponsored by Kyle's brushes. That would be the world's smallest ad campaign if that were the case. They're just what I use, and they're definitely worth the shout out. It was really cool working on this piece with all those brushes and remembering how I used to work and what I used to know and realizing what I know now and how I can apply that knowledge to be faster and do things more effectively. Sometimes In art, it's a bit easy to get frustrated because you make progress slowly, and there aren't always definitive landmarks to identify your progress. When you go back and look at your old work or return to old methods, you realize how much you've grown. It's really satisfying when you can do that, but it takes a long time and a lot of work to get there. So in my first couple videos, I talked about where I put emphasis, whether it was on the size comparison of the characters or the lighting and the mood. So for this piece, the goal wasn't really to call out one specific element, but rather to make it feel unified and central, since that's what usually works for greeting cards. One interesting thing I learned from school, which I wish I'd remembered while working on this piece, but it just now popped in my head, was that with greeting cards, you also want to keep in mind how they're sold. Typically, they're stacked and layered and hidden behind other cards. If you're lucky, the design will be at the front, and so the customer can see the whole card. But that's never a guarantee. So my teacher said to keep in mind that the top part of the card will always stick out and be seen behind the other cards. Certainly you don't have to design just that top part to look good, and the goal should always be to create a good overall design no matter what. It's just something to keep in mind, especially if you're working with a more minimalist style. It helps to have something on top to help catch people's eye and fill that blank space instead of leaving it blank. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how this piece came out. I'm iffy about those eyes. I can't decide what I think of those. I don't think I've ever drawn eyes quite that huge before, but I think they work. I like how the colors and lighting came out with this. I'm glad I did a color comp, and that's a step I usually don't give that much credence to. I know some people who are watching right now might not know what I mean by comp, so I'll explain. It's basically a quick doodle version of the way you want the colors to look. So instead of spending hours coloring it, then having to recolor it, you just quickly throw color down and test stuff out quickly to find out what works, then spend time doing the final version after you have it all sorted out. For some reason, color comps don't always work for me, or they used to not work. There was just some sort of disconnect between the way that it looked in the comp and the way that it looked in the finished version. Lately, though, my color comps have been helping, and for this one in particular, it really worked out in my favor. I also have been enjoying this final step, which is pretty new to my technique, again because of the Photoshop brushes. I recently found another one that I like, but this final lighting overpass where I draw this layer of color and then use a blending mode to overlay it onto the piece, it helps unify the colors and add extra lighting to it, which I like. Then, of course, going back in and throwing a final texture on there just to give it a little bit more spice. Alright, so that's about it for this piece. As I say on Good Mythical Morning, thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing. If you want to see more of my work, follow me on Instagram. If you want to get prints of this or other pieces, head over to my shop. Links are in the description box. Thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you next time.